Okay, everyone, so having done some digging around about our missing data here, I have stumbled across an administrative distinction that I would need to correct in my original, I would need to correct somewhere, let's put it that way, in one of my data sets in order to ensure that my merge worked as desired. So you notice that this, I noticed, perhaps you also noticed that this row of data came up blank. That's because there was no ISO two-digit code, which again doesn't appear in this merged table, that had the value EL. So after some poking around, I bounced around to some Eurostat sites and tried to figure out what this was. I found the regions in the European Union, I scrolled down, I did some Google translating, and you can see, and it detected the language that I found associated with EL as Greek, which I sort of suspected might be the case. And you can see here, actually, even in this Wikipedia page preview, it shows that the European Commission generally uses ISO Alpha 2 codes with two exceptions. EL, not GR, is used to represent Greece, and UK, not GB, is used to represent Great Britain. And so I have a choice, of course. Probably what I would opt to do, I would obviously need to remerge this data. Probably what I would opt to do is I would actually try to duplicate this row. And so I would duplicate the row so that I have both. And instead of having GR here, I would have EL, right? So I would technically, in my source document, I would have two copies of Greece, but in any given data set, I'm only likely to encounter one of those codes. So if I were to then just ignore this table, I don't really need to worry about it, and then do this merge again, right? So again, same process here, but I've now added another row to my country codes data where I've duplicated Greece but given it the code EL, which is what my source data has. I should now actually get all of my data mapped accurately. So let's see if this works. And indeed, it does seem that Greece has come through okay. So it's just an example of there are all these little quirks that start to happen when you start kind of mashing up or zipping up data in this way, and it's really experience is going to attune you to them. But the reason why I chose the solution that I did, which is duplicating the KML row that has Greece in it, is because rather than going in and manually changing my source data, it's going to be easier for me to just make sure that my kind of world map reference boundaries include all of the possible variants. To be perfectly honest with you, I find that the so-called ISO 3-digit or codes are also often very useful. You want to look for things, labeling mechanisms that turn up a lot in data. The 2-digit and 3-digit are very common. I would probably want to, at some point, augment this data set with those 3-digit codes so that if I come across numerical data, for example, that has 3-digit codes, again, I can just constantly be reusing this map, this base table over and over again. I'm going to go ahead and edit this now, edit the table. I'm going to call this new asylum complications in the EU. And I think that's it. And hit save. Right, so that's just to make it, I have a lot of merge tables. I can go back those other merge tables. I can go into my Google Fusion tables and just delete now, get rid of them. I also recommend that you do that. So now I'm going to go to the map of geometry, and the question now is, what should this map reflect? Well, as I zoom in, and again, just confirm that everything is appearing as I wish it to. Now what I'm going to do is go to this change feature styles, and it's going to give me a bunch of options. What we are concerned with is the fill color of the polygons, right? That's the shapes that outline the countries. And I'm going to choose column, and instead of using the color specified, instead of using column, I'm going to use buckets. Okay, so I have a few different options here, and this is where it can get tricky with mapping. So the default choices for Google Fusion Tables maps is quite naive. And so it's just going to say, okay, which column do you want to use? I'm going to use 2016. What it's showing me here, okay, is the actual range of the data in that particular column. So we see that the low end is 39,000, the high end is over 720,000. And so I can say use this range, except actually I don't want 2 buckets. I'm probably going to want around 5. Again, I can hit this button. It's hopefully going to, yep, it's going to sort of auto do this for me. Now, we can see that the default values here are problematic. And as we've discussed in class, they are problematic precisely for the reason that they're showing different colors. And as we know, what we are looking at is a range of data. We are looking at a difference in amount, not a difference in type, which means that we should be looking at the same color at different intensities rather than 5 different colors. So this is another example of how the default behaviors on tools often run counter to best or even sensible practices. I've mentioned this to them many times. I don't know why it still persists. It lets people make horrible maps. Could choose some good defaults here. However, I'm going to correct this again in a very naive way, which is to say I'm just going to choose 5 colors of red. Now, why is this so naive? We talked a little bit about color theory. I'm also going to, well, first of all, make sure that I'm choosing different colors, which is very difficult to see here. One thing I'm going to do is change the opacity to about 80% on all of these. In my experience, 80% is about right in terms of something that allows you to see the underlying map information, but also is strong enough that the color is evident. So we're just going to do this. Okay, and now I see that these two are the same. Okay, again, these are not great map choices. These are not great color choices. Why? We've talked about how things like saturation, brightness affect our perception of differences in color. This red looks a lot more intense than this red. This red looks sort of darker. It has more black in it, I would say, but doesn't necessarily look the same, doesn't seem to be the same difference in intensity from this one as this one is from this one, or as these two are from each other, right? So map coloration is a very precise thing. Also, I have let them naively select the buckets here, the ranges. Generally what it will do is it will simply divide it into X number of equal buckets. What we really want to be looking at here is something much closer to the work that we've been doing on kind of the work that we've been doing on measures of central tendency and spread, right? We want to make sure that we are choosing ranges that properly emphasize essentially what we would do is divide our data into quartiles based on the possible values and use that to select our buckets. In any case, all of that aside for the time being, as this is sort of a functional demonstration, I'm going to choose Save. And this is the result that we get, which is actually that they're all quite similar. Now we see that Germany looks very intense, right? It is much more dramatic. So this is a really bad map right now, and the reason why it's really bad is because although we've chosen the 5 buckets, it's not showing that it's not really showing our distribution very effectively. It is favoring Germany enormously in that it appears much more intense with Germany. But in fact, if we were to normalize this, say, against all of our data, which would probably be which would be more appropriate, even though we're not mapping it, we're just emphasizing these 5. Again, we can see how the way that we distribute that data and that color selection can really influence the appearance of intensity and what the map therefore communicates. So I just want to highlight here that the info window, by default, they will sort of throw in a bunch of stuff. Fortunately, it's ignored a bunch of other stuff. I would want to go ahead and deselect these things. I don't really need the country code. I would probably prefer the country name, which I think is actually in here, right? So, and moreover, let me just double check that this is the correct name, the name that I want, right? So beyond that, I can actually go into custom, and this is simply HTML. So I can actually do things like move around these values, right? And I can add static information to each of these info windows. So for example, I can say something like, if I use an EM tag, an EM HTML tag, I can say something like source, which is a good idea, Eurostat, right? I probably want that to come up on every info window. I choose save. We now see that that has added data, added that. I may want to add a formatted version of the number, which is currently showing up, for example, without units and without commas. So I might say name, data, make sure I get a BR tag here, and say people, right, and so on and so forth. If I wanted to have comments that were specific to each country, the way that I would go about doing that, and I would probably do it by adding it to my original data set, is in Excel, because it's going to be much easier to work in Excel. I would add a column where I would add specific comments about each country, and then I can use that as a feature in the info window if I want to add custom text. So this is just to, again, basically give you a very general overview of how we can go about physically constructing interactive maps, or maps in general. Another thing that I will point out, so when it comes to colors, the real default thing here is the thing that everyone uses is Color Brewer. This is a great resource and allows us to choose color schemes. These have been kind of developed and tested for accurately reflecting our perceptual distinction between colors, so that it appears that the difference in intensity is even. So I could choose, for example, a single hue red here, tell it that I need 5 data classes or segments. You really never want to go more than 5, 6 at the very, very most. And then I can use these hexadecimal values actually in my map. If I go back to feature styles here, I can actually simply just enter those manually here so that I get a much better balance of color. From here, I can go ahead and export. It's a little hard for me to show on this window, but I can go to publish this map. I can change the visibility so that I can put it on a public web page, and I can embed this as an iframe. So an iframe, again, is just another HTML tag that allows me to actually essentially post a window into another web page, which is how we typically embed Fusion Tables maps. We can also do it this way if we want to do it manually. This is actually pretty nice and has a mobile option. So hopefully this has provided you with a nice basic introduction to mapping. There is certainly much more that can be done with it, but as you will note, it is a complex and sometimes fraught topic. So we'll be discussing this more, and obviously as you work through your final projects, we can look at other solutions for dealing with this. That is all for now.